advantages that date funds basically have over target risk. And that's the whole idea of this panel. So without further ado, I would like to begin with Ramu. And I would like basically to ask Ramu exactly what major changes will reshape the world economy in the coming decades. And I would like to add a little bit on that. Exactly how these changes are going to affect the way we save. And thank you very much, Ramu, for being here with us.
Thank you, and great to be here. We have been seeing a number of what I call tectonic shifts in the market. If you go back and look at economic history, I think one would say that after GFC it started. But in the last few years, this has escalated, and we know what happened in the last 24 hours with the number of wide-ranging tariff announcements from the administration. In terms of mega trends, I want to say that we have been thinking about this issue for a while, and we want to articulate 5 different forces, what we are now favorably called 5 Ds. The first one is deglobalization, and this is the shift to more protectionist measures that has happened in many parts of the world, and we've seen again what happened yesterday. As an expression of that, deglobalization is inflationary. And that's something as a trend that we have seen, and that's the first one. It's not just the US and other parts of the world as well. The second mega trend that obviously pretty much everybody faces is the issue of decarbonization and climate change, and how that can impact the cost of goods and services globally, and other structural issues such as migration, which those types of things have not been fully priced. So that's also inflationary. So you've got deglobalization, trying to make your goods and services within each country, or making most of it within each country, is inflationary, and so is trying to decarbonize and finding ways in which you can protect your properties in an era of climate change. And the third one is the world has been awash in debt. We have seen what has happened to debt to GDP in practically every country, including Colombia, go up, and the cost of debt has gone up as a result. Risk premium is higher. So though all 3 issues are inflationary, and the fourth one that's been an age
very popular, and it's not just a US phenomenon. So I'll kind of challenge that a little bit. What I would describe this as is target date funds are an outcome of a problem. They're not the input into the problem. And it's a very important statement to make, so I'll say it again. The target date funds are the outcome, not the input. What you're seeing happen in multiple countries around the world that are not going to use defined benefit plans and start using defined contribution plans is there's what I would describe as the rise of professionalization. So what you're seeing in some more of the advanced defined contribution markets, US, United Kingdom, Australia, we often forget about, and I would put Canada in that bucket as well. There's some Northern European countries we can talk about as well. They're going through the transition. What you would see in Australia is we don't call them target date funds, we call them superannuation. In the United Kingdom, what we're calling them now are master trusts. In both the US and Canada, we call them target date funds. But what all four of these countries are solving is how do you get income to retirees after about a 45-year working life. We call that a life cycle model. So before you think about target date funds, you have to think about what are you trying to solve? And what we're trying to solve is what's called the life cycle model. When we all start working about our 20s. We have a 100% unfunded liability, 45 years in the future, that we call retirement. So the objective of a target date fund is not to just balance risks over a lifetime, it's to immunize that liability. So the target date funds are popular because they take more risk when you're young. Understanding how to immunize that liability is you're getting older and you have less time to work. It's not that they're getting less risky, you have less ability to save in less time, so we need to take less market risk, but there's other risks that we have to consider. So when you've moved away from DB plans, you've put the burden on the individual, and that's where the rise of professionalization comes in. So what we've done in all four of these markets, US, Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, is we professionalized asset allocation. We professionalized risk-taking over a lifetime. We professionalized procurement, which keeps costs down. We professionalized rebalancing. So what you're seeing in most markets around the world, markets are not starting defined benefit plans. They're starting defined contribution plans because this risk is shifting from corporates and governments to the individuals. That's what you're seeing happen. In the US, it ramped up about 20 years ago with some regulatory changes. The UK started to ramp up in about 2015 with similar regulatory changes. Australia was around the same time as the US when superannuation started to ramp up. But they're all solving the same problem. We just call them different things.
Great. Thank you very much for providing us with that understanding of how things have been shaping up in other countries. Jacob, I would like to ask you, how does the target date scheme improve the replacement rates compared to a target risk system? Because we are right now in Colombia in a target risk system, so we will really like to understand exactly if this is an advantage or not.
Again, thanks for inviting us and having us. This is the most timely discussion to have now that you're thinking about transitioning. I guess if I think about the concept of those target risk funds and then the concept of target date funds, there are some commonalities and some common features, right, as was just mentioned, where really the idea and concept is that you have a professionally managed multi-asset class portfolio that ultimately looks to deliver, working income replacement into retirement, right? And the idea is that when you have got more time to retirement, and that's true for both target risk and target date funds, you can take more risk. Younger people have more time to absorb the risk and capture the growth opportunities from taking more market risk. But then as you get closer to retirement, your focus should shift to preserving that accumulated savings for retirement, right, to be sure to fund that. The challenge that you face with these target risk schemes is that the transition from that more market risk-oriented growth portfolio to a more capital preservation-oriented portfolio tends to happen abrupt. And across a large population, you're going to find people who contribute to those schemes facing very widely different investment environments when they transition in target risk. And so the outcome could be impacted by that. And what the target date fund, the guide path design does, is really it smooths the transition. And so gives you that, smoother concept, a more holistic, simpler, one-stop solution, for managing the accumulated savings. And then in terms of actual, you said replacement rate, right? It's not about target date funds and glide paths are not about maximizing the account balances for individuals. It's really how can you create that glide path, that portfolio in a way that you get the largest possible number of people to achieve a certain account balance so they can retire by annuity or some other product that actually provides that liability hedge or that income stream into retirement. And that's just more efficient to a glide path type of solution rather than doing like discrete changes to the risk profiles.
Excellent, thank you. Sarah, if you have seen this international experience in other countries, and if you had this opportunity to design a target date system from scratch, basically, what key features would you consider to incorporate if we're thinking about maximizing the capital and accumulation efficiency for retirement? And associated to that, I would also like to ask you how these funds adapt to the changing needs of affiliates throughout their working lives.
Sure. Thank you for the question. And I will also thank everyone for inviting us here to beautiful Cartagena. A couple of features that I think are very important when you're kind of starting from scratch. And I look at this from the perspective, I'm obviously from the United States. We don't use a lot of alternatives for a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons, I think, is because our target date strategies are funds of funds, and they are used in separate and distinct parts of portfolio. So for example, BlackRock 2045, may have a high yield element, and that high yield component can be held in other parts of people's portfolios. So a variety of reasons we don't use alternatives a lot, but they can be very accretive to incremental returns, especially in the farther dated vintages. So I think the utilization of alternatives for the illiquidity risk premium and equities in farther dated vintages, I think those are very important. Secondly, I would say a real focus when you're building that sort of allocation on not just your asset class allocation, and that I would define as equity, fixed income, alternatives, cash, but more granular because you're going to have different risk contributions. So sticking with my fixed income example, if you're looking at a high yield allocation, that has a very different risk return profile than would some sort of investment grade mandate. So those would be some big distinctions. In terms of managing it through the end or more toward retirement, I think it's important to really think through the implications of that de-risking glide path. And I believe we'll be talking about glide paths a lot, but you have to remember that when you enter retirement, you probably need more equity allocation than you might think if you want to be able to minimize the longevity risk of outliving your money.
Great. I want to start this second round of questions basically with you again, Sarah, just to ask you, because already Nick mentioned it, you're already talking about this concept of the glide path, and everybody talks about that. But it will be, because it really looks like it is fundamental basically to the management of this concept of the target date funds. Could you please explain to us how this concept is applied in practice, and what factors basically should we consider in order to optimize the evolution of this asset allocation as affiliates approach retirement?
Sure. So as an index provider, I will look at it from an index perspective and kind of pepper in kind of what I see fund companies doing, but I want to disclose that I can only speak as an index provider. And I think that there are two general ways to build a glide path. One is looking at the overall asset class level and then populating that with your sub-asset classes. The alternative is the opposite, where you look at what exposures you want. So if you're looking at this more from the perspective I mentioned in the last question, where you're looking at your risk contribution, you would look at the risk contribution of your underlying sub-asset classes and kind of add that up to get what your glide path is for equity, fixed income, and alternatives. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Oh, sure. I was basically asking you what factors should be considered to optimize the evolution of this asset allocation.
I would say that the starting with your endpoint. It's going to be very important what I alluded to earlier, what the equity allocation, and I would presume no alternatives allocation, essentially leading into retirement. That is going to need to be a little higher than you would anticipate if you want to be able to not outlive your money. So being able to start with that endpoint and almost go backward. A second part of that would be when in your farther dated vintages, I would say, or your generational funds, 20 to 40 years of retirement, you are going to have, it's a general sort of asset allocation principle. The longer you're in the market, the better. So the longer you're invested in equities or alternatives, the more you can weather any sort of storms, and you're not going to be accessing that cash. If you think of this from a perspective of somebody who's retiring, once you put this money into the pot that somebody is going to manage for your retirement, you aren't touching it until you retire. So leaving it invested for as long as possible, and have it and kind of peeling off that risk in a consistent fashion, which is what differentiates it from target risk. You're not, today would not be a day you would necessarily want to reallocate and remove a lot of equity exposure. You're kind of starting in the hole. So the starting point, the ending point, and making sure that you are maximizing your time in equities and alternatives, I think, are key.
Excellent. And Jacob, talking about this multi-asset solutions, what role do alternative assets, basically commodities, private equity, real estate, should play within this framework? Are they something that basically we use? When do we use it? When we're young, when we're old? Exactly. Tell us about this.
I'll answer that question two ways. One, conceptually and in theory, and then two, how we do it in practice, which may be slightly different, but hopefully some food for thought or gets people thinking who run glide paths or think about building glide paths and multi-asset portfolios in here. Obviously, firstly, when you think about building a multi-asset class portfolio, you want diversification, right? And we talked about reducing market risks, getting more efficient portfolios, and certainly casting a wider net and having a broader investment universe is going to help you with that, right? And particularly in earlier vintages, when you've got more time to retirement, growth assets, private market growth assets seem like the logical thing to own, right? So there is certainly a place from that strategic asset allocation theoretical point of view, but practically speaking, I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, you need to factor in robust return forecasts, and particularly in extended markets and alternative markets. You will often find that manager selection is as important as asset allocation. So I'll give you an example from our long-term forward-looking return forecasts. In the past, the dispersion of returns between your top and bottom quartile large cap managers over a decade was 200 basis points, 2%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but if you compound it, that's real money already. But it's nothing compared to the 20% return dispersion you have between your top and bottom PE manager, right? So you want to make sure that when you allocate to these type of assets, these type of private market strategies, you can select the right manager. You don't get just the median or mediocre return, which brings me to the other consideration that I think is crucial. And when we think about allocating to these type of assets in our portfolios, not just glide path, but multi-asset in general, is I think you need to be really intentional. And you need to be able to answer to yourself the question, what am I funding that allocation from, right? If I think about private equity, why should I go through all the, let me say, brain damage and potentially fees of getting mediocre returns if I can't identify the appropriate manager, and if public markets might give me the same, right? So I think you always need a funding source in your portfolio, and that's true for private equity, private credit. Why shouldn't I own, my public high yield portfolio, and even real estate and our real assets? That's not to say that they cannot play a really important role. We've had great returns. We've had massive success with allocating to alts, but you need to be intentional. You need to screen them properly. You need to be intentional in allocating them. And that's particularly true, I think, in glide path management, where, again, as you approach the years closer to retirement, you need to be mindful of liquidity and all these other things like transparency to make sure you actually handle them right. We have recently, for example, added to direct real estate. So we do use them, but again, it's all about like how do you actually do it intentionally and what's the value add you get from them. You don't just, you know, like I said, waste your time allocating to something because that's what everyone does.
Great. Nick, you just talk to us about how BlackRock basically has done this development of many target date funds all over the world. Even in emerging markets such as Mexico, basically you have had that experience. So let's move on a little bit from the financial part of the story. And I would like to hear your views and basically how, from your experience, do you deal with the local regulations, with the restrictions and the dynamics of getting this done and the transition and everything?
Okay, so thank you for the question. We've talked a lot about asset allocation, and before we can get to asset allocation, we have to do the demographic analysis. And part of the demographic analysis is both what are we solving? So is it an income replacement that we're solving? Is it a minimum wage plus a multiple that we're solving, which is what sounds like is coming in here to some extent? We have to think about the localization as well. So what we're not doing is taking a US product and just delivering it to another country. What we're doing is we're taking essentially an equation and we localize that equation. So before we ever talk about asset allocation, we have to figure out what is it that we're solving. And what we're solving for is retirement income. We have to figure out how do we solve for retirement income given regulation and also given local market capital markets. So Mexico, for example, has higher short-term bond yields than developed markets. It has higher inflation than developed markets. It has higher variability of inflation. All of that has to be put into the modeling before we ever talk about what does the glide path look like or what assets that we can buy. So I think one of the misses that we make in talking about target date funds, and I said this just a moment ago, is the target date fund is an outcome after you've done the demographic analysis. So we're currently operational in 9 countries around the world, and then in the US, I think we have 6 different target date funds. All of those funds start with the same blank sheet of paper. We have to understand what does local earnings look like? What does local spending look like? What does mortality look like in these countries? What are capital market assumptions? Regulations get put into that as well. So we have different regulatory bodies around the world that we have to work with. For example, in France, we're not allowed to own more than 70% equities in the French market. Therefore, our long-dated vintages have 70% equities capped, even though we would like to own 100% equities. That creates other problems then in the modeling. So when you model these funds, and this is super important, this is a math problem. What that means is that you have a certain amount of time that you have to work, you have a certain amount that you have to save, and there's a certain amount of risk that you have to take to get you to the retirement income. If you decide to take less risk, that's okay, but that means you have to work longer or save more money. If you decide you don't want to save as much, you have to take more risk or work longer. There's no silver bullet in these funds. So we get sucked into a lot of these conversations about asset allocation or about what should the assets be. This is a problem of time, risk, and savings. That's what the problem really comes down into. And understanding what the amount of savings is that you're going to need in retirement is what's important. And then we have to figure out how to immunize that. So Mexico or these local markets, we just have to localize those variables. And that's why when you look at our target date funds, in the most conservative, it starts at 60% equities. The most aggressive is 100% equities. And then the most conservative lands at 10% equities, and the most aggressive lands at 50% equities. All of that just has to do with localization.
Excellent. Ramu, Nick was talking about demographics and how basically the composition of working age populations basically end up affecting what you do. So I would like to ask you to kind of approach to the Colombian case. And I would like to ask you if we do know that the majority of Colombians saving for retirements are basically under 35. And you know that 8 out of 10 are younger than 45. How is it possible, or how normally is this incorporated into the changes when we're thinking about a retirement savings portfolio?
Well, that's an important question. I want to touch on some of the points that my colleagues here made. Nick mentioned the fact at the very beginning that you're trying to fund an obligation 45 years out. we think about longevity risk that Sarah talked about, it's not just starting with 45 years, you have to fund it for a longer period of time. Okay. So the youth today, people here in Colombia who face this issue have to recognize the fact that longevity risk is really important, and you need to incorporate that in your modeling. It's not just that Jacob was talking about the importance of making sure that you do rebalancing properly. You have proper rebalancing algorithms, right? And you need to figure out what really should be the expected income when you actually do retire, depending on your needs, so that you can come up with an asset allocation process to incorporate that. Now, also, we have to remember, go back to the 5 Ds that we talked about. The world is changing, right? Go back and look at what's happening to the inflation tendency in Japan right now. Nobody expected Japanese inflation numbers to be what it is. Roll back 10 years or even 15 years or so, and you asked about a retiree or for somebody's planning to retire, what is likely to be the inflationary tendencies in Japan. Nobody would have expected the outcome that we see today. There is a cultural shift happening in Japan that is likely to inflame inflationary impulses. If that's the case, your real income is going to be lower. So what needs to happen is the professionals that are on the stage here today, we need to take into consideration tail risk scenarios, do different types of risk modeling for the income that you might need for different inflationary environment, so that needs to be incorporated in our asset allocation process. See what I'm saying? So you need to figure out not only the longevity risk, the fact that the cost that you may have to endure down the road for the time that you will be living, and to make sure that you have proper macro scenarios built into your asset allocation process. So it may be a long way of saying that you should talk to professionals about this, but what it does say is that you may have to have the appropriate strategic asset allocation models in place so that you can figure out how much of equities that you need, maybe more than you think, right? The standard answer, if you're a young person, is you take more risk, you have more, you capture the equity risk premium. But the world seems to be changing in terms of where the world might land with respect to inflationary impulses. If that's the case, if you think about the traditional negative correlation that you get with bonds from equity risk, it's not been happening for some time. Where do you get the diversification benefits? How do you get the income? These are things to be thought through in a world that's changing, and in a world where longevity risk is going to be higher given the demographics. So those are the things to think about for the youth here.
Very interesting, Ramu. Nick, I would like to get back to you, just to ask you a question about one of the features that the implementation of the new pension fund system has. Basically, in Colombia, under this new regime, basically says that when you meet pension requirements, the safe funds must be used to purchase either an annuity or other alternatives. But what exactly are the traditional options that exist, apart from an annuity, of course, when that situation happens? What are the financial options that have to exist when we get to that situation?
A couple ways to answer this question. First of all, we've launched target date funds globally that embed insurance in them. Sometimes it's a direct annuity, sometimes it's not a direct annuity. So a product in the US right now that's getting popularity is called LifePath Paycheck. Takes insurance and puts it right into the target date fund. So it gets you to that goal in retirement of guaranteed income, looking for with about 30% of the assets. But that didn't answer your question. The problem we've had in other countries is there's not a deep enough insurance market to be able to build these types of products. So you hear the word tontine thrown out a lot. And the reason why there's tontines is if you don't have a long duration liquid bond ladder, and a corporate bond ladder as well, or corporate bond issuance, corporate bond curve, not ladder, then it's very difficult to build annuities. We have technologies that we've used. We refer to them as adaptive pensions. The idea of an adaptive pension is we can take into account mortality, which is critical to understand how long these assets are going to last. And then we can look at both sides of the balance sheet on this. So we can look at both what are the underlying assets and what are the payouts that we need to have for those assets. So instead of building an insurance infrastructure, we can actually build vehicles. We've already done this globally. We can build vehicles it's an asset vehicle that will pay off a fixed amount of money, slightly variable, we can calibrate the variability, but will align to mortality expectations. So saying it differently, what the regulation is looking for is consistent income in retirement. That's what the regulation is looking for. Traditionally, we would have solved that with insurance. We've actually created new ways that it's not quite a tontine. We've solved new ways or created new ways to solve the same problem.
Thanks. Jacob, going back to what seems to be extremely important under this new regime, which is the glide path mechanism. In the designing of this glide path, when we're thinking about that in Colombia, what should we be thinking about? Is it the objective to maximize the replacement rate? Is it to minimize annuity volatility? Is it both? What should we do about that?
Well, first I will also say, and we've done this in multiple markets and countries too, it's really important to understand local demographics, regulation, et cetera. That's ultimately going to drive your glide path design. But if there's one kind of common objective, if you were to find one across the entire world, then yes, you're trying to solve for achieving working income replacement through that solution. But that's not to say that you want to maximize the income replacement rate. What you want is, as I said, you want to get the largest possible number of participants, of people, across that finish line, giving them the highest probability, the biggest chance of actually getting to that balance, right? So in some ways, it's a balance between getting the capital growth, but then the distribution around that outcomes should be the most narrow that you can somehow achieve. So how can you actually make sure that you get, not too much dispersion? Because as I said, we talk about this conception, but in the real world, different participants will face very different market environments when the target date, the glide path matures. So you need to build it in a way that the dispersion of those outcomes is not too wide.
And Sarah, we're coming to this target date funds from a system that's already put in place. Right? We have this target risk. And in Colombia, we basically have three portfolios, right? The low risk, the moderate, and the high risk. So thinking about the transition, and when we put this into place, we're going to have basically some people already with some savings and with decisions associated to each one of these portfolios. How do we handle that transition in the most efficient way possible? And what risk we need to consider when doing this transition?
So I think there's a portfolio question there and potentially an education question there. The portfolio question, while I have to try to stay in my lane again as an index provider, what I would say is portfolio managers need to be very cognizant of the markets that they're moving from and to. So there needs to be some sort of plan of purchases and sales so that you're not, if it's a thinly traded market, something like senior loans or preferreds. If you move anything in mass quantity in a thinly traded market, you're going to move the market. So being able to have as much time as possible to transition the assets from one asset class to another, I think that's really key. Time. And then the education element, I think in the United States, I was having this conversation yesterday, I think you have two types of people. We should all try to educate everyone, but there are certain people who are just overwhelmed with these types of choices, and they're just going to want somebody to do it for them, which is why target date is actually a pretty good option, because you're essentially outsourcing your own management to a team of PMs who are looking at this on a daily basis. I have my retirement in target date, and I've done asset allocation in my career, but I'm not looking at it every day. So it's great. So for people who don't want any sort of education and they go into anaphylactic shock when you mention equities, just, that default option of target date is great, and you just don't give them any more education, but it's good to have the option for people who do want to know more, but still have professional managers managing their retirement.
So basically, to summarize, we made it, guys. We were able to do it on time. So I appreciate your answers. Just to basically summarize this, we have a very challenging change of system ahead of us. but definitely looks like for the users is going to be something that is going to be easier. We're not going to have to be focusing on what exactly should I do. And we do have an international experience on this that definitely we should bank on in order to fulfill this change without major problems. So I want to thank every one of you. Thank you very much, because I think this was a very interesting panel. Thank you, guys. Buenas tardes.
Muchísimas gracias. Por favor, nos da una foto para dejar en constancia este especial evento, este especial momento. Agradecemos al moderador, a los panelistas. Muchísimas gracias. La siguiente conferencia contará con servicio de traducción simultánea. Recuerden, los que requieran de ese servicio pueden solicitar sus equipos de traducción al ingresar al salón con un documento de identidad. ¿Cómo fortalecer el ahorro voluntario en Colombia? Continuando con la agenda, pasamos ahora a la conferencia de nuestro keynote speaker, quien nos hablará sobre este tema. Para ello invito al escenario a Shlomo Benartzi, fundador Save More, Tomorrow Smart. El señor Benartzi es un economista conductual interesado en combinar los conocimientos de la psicología y la economía para resolver grandes problemas sociales. Trabaja en la creación de estímulos digitales que aprovechan la tecnología para lograr una escala masiva y ayudar a millones de personas a tomar mejores decisiones financieras. Recibió un doctorado de la Escuela de Administración de Johnson de la Universidad de Cornell y actualmente es profesor emérito y cofundador del grupo de toma de decisiones conductuales en la Escuela de Administración Anderson de UCLA. Bienvenido, señor Bernazzi. Adelante.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Very excited to be here. I'm going to talk about behavioral finance and AI. Why do we care about that? Why? How many of you feel that Colombians would have to save more money on their own for retirement going forward? Anyone? Wow. Then we got to find ways to do it. And if we don't understand the behavior of people, if we don't have the behavioral finance, it's going to be very difficult. Because the way we used to do it in most countries, we virtually tell people, we've got this great idea. We're going to take your money away. Why? Because you're going to have some money in the future. When? We don't know when you retire. How much? We don't know. It depends on the markets. Maybe more, maybe less. And that's not very attractive, as you could imagine. So we're going to have to do better. Why AI? Why? What does a behavioral economist do with AI? I can barely function a laptop. Well, we're going to have to find ways to actually do a couple of things. One is we're going to have to find ways to use machines to provide guidance and advice for people. We're going to have to do it at scale, and we're going to have to personalize it because people are different. And without the technology, we're not going to be able to do that. So in a nutshell, if we're on a mission to help people in Colombia, and that's a global problem in a lot of countries, but if we're on a mission to help people prepare for their financial futures, then we're going to have to find ways to engage them. And it's not the most exciting thing on the planet to talk about retirement. And we're going to have to move from engaging them to taking action, which is not easy given the complexity of financial decisions. And we're going to have to do it all in a way that is personalized and feels relevant to people. So let's talk about engagement. This is a related domain. We'll get to retirement savings, I promise you. This is an experiment with visual AI. So very much like, how many of you are using like OpenAI, ChatGPT, one of those AI tools? Why? How did we live without it a year or two ago? In any case, this is similar technology, but we don't generate just copy, we generate images. And in one condition, we tell people that they can put money and invest in the environment, and we would move from congested, slow areas to cheaper, faster, safer if we were to invest in the environment. And they're not that keen to actually do anything. In the other condition, we just generate a picture of what the world would look like. We have them type the address where they live. We tell the computer, go there, take a picture from whatever the database that you have, and now create a picture of what it would look if everyone was using the bicycle and the bus and doing all sorts of things that are environmentally friendly, but it's personalized. So if you live in Mexico City, you get a picture of Mexico City. If you live in Colombia, you get a picture of your neighborhood. And suddenly, moving from just words into an actual picture, people are willing to increase their support for becoming environmentally green and taking care of the environment. What's most interesting, it affects those who were most skeptical and hesitant to invest in the environment. So you could imagine now those who are least likely to save, maybe we could find ways to actually encourage them to start saving. So here's a fun experiment we're running with 300,000 people in the US. I think it'd be amazing to run with people in Colombia too. We call it the retirement visualizer. You virtually write about your retirement. So we just ask you, what do you want your retirement to look like? And this is a good friend of mine, and he said, I'd like to spend more time volunteering at my church, but I also want enough money to take my grandkids to Disneyland. In the US, taking your kids, grandkids to Disneyland is like, it's a sign of the happy life. Don't ask me why. I hate that place. I mean, if I wanted to spend time with Mickey Mouse, anyway. But here's an interesting thing. We build a machinery to create an image. My friend is asking for two different things. The church and Mickey Mouse, not the same thing. Look what the machine figured out on its own. Created two pictures. The machine just on its own decided, oh, what's the big deal? We'll create two pictures and put them on one screen. So we're experimenting. We'll know very soon if it engages people. We do show people sample images before they write and they get their own. Now, a very common critique of this is, we've used pictures and it doesn't work. We've sent everyone a beautiful brochure of how they're going to be on the beach when they retire, and nobody responds and nobody saves. Several problems. A, people don't relate to it, period, because they don't think that retirement would be such an amazing thing. They're kind of realistic that, it's not like suddenly they're going to have money for private jets and a yacht when they retire. But the bigger problem is we're providing the same picture to everyone. There's no personalization. Why would they relate to it? Imagine a dating site and everyone gets the same guy or the same girl, it's not going to work very well. So the personalization is important. And this is not predictive AI, where you have a database of 10 pictures and you're thinking Diego should get one picture and Shlomi should get another. It's your picture. You write and we generate it. It's not personalization anymore. It's personalization. It can't get any more personalized than that, because you're dictating what would be in that picture, and of course you could also change it. So let's talk about if we're able to engage people, which is not easy. I mean, if you think about it, if I had the magic solution to engagement, right, I'd be wealthier than Elon Musk and Bill Gates, because the world is about competing for the attention of people. It's not easy, and everyone is wanting to compete for it. So, but let's say that we're doing better with engagement. We're able to get the attention of people. We have to make it easy to take action. I spent a lot of my career working with Richard Thaler, the Nobel laureate, and he often says that if there was one lesson from behavioral economics is make it easy. Make the right choice the easy choice. So how can we make things easy? So this is a program I worked with Thaler since the 90s. So, 30 years, it's a long time. Anyway, we virtually came with the idea in the US, like what you're experiencing now in Colombia. In the US, we moved from pensions to kind of what we call 401k plans, defined contribution plans. And the concern was that people would not save enough on their own. So we came with the idea of save more tomorrow. Why not today? Because, it's like our diet plan. Tonight, we're going to go and eat and drink a bit and dessert. Tomorrow morning, maybe we'll wake up for the gym, maybe. But next year, we're running a marathon. We're going to be really fit. So a lot of people told us it's difficult to do the right things now, but it's easy to imagine doing it in the future. So we said, fine, why don't we save more tomorrow? Now, of course, the question is, when is tomorrow, right? Because it can't be literally tomorrow, because I need to pay the rent and I don't have money and I won't have money tomorrow. So it kind of opened a lot of interesting questions about tomorrow will not work. Would Saturday work? Well, I still didn't pay the rent. Would next month work? And later on, we found that actually tomorrow starts about 3 months from now. We can imagine doing the right things roughly in 3 months from now. But we thought, could we do better than that? And we virtually decided, why don't we save more money when we get a pay raise? You make more money. You don't have to cut your expenses. So we timed the increases with pay raises. So that's a great plan. And if we told you that every time you get a pay raise, you should go back to the HR office and fill a form and say that you want to save more and you should do it every year and don't forget to do it, how many would remember to do it? Nobody, right? It's too much effort. So we put it on an autopilot. So we asked people once, do you want to join this program? Every time you get a pay raise, you're going to save 3% more. Very aggressive program. And unless you change your mind, it's going to happen automatically. And there were two academics, me and Thaler, and there was a financial advisor setting up this program for us with an employer. By the way, took us 3 years to find an employer to do it, because everyone wants to be first after someone else has already done it. So he virtually said, we're going to increase it by 3%. We said there's no way, it's too aggressive, people don't have money. This was a middle, this was really kind of low to middle class, blue collar employees at a manufacturing facility in the Midwest. They were struggling. These are not people making a lot of money. We say it's too much, they cannot do it. They say, you guys don't understand anything, it's gonna work. I talk to those people, I know them, you are academics. So let's see what the results showed. So these are people who didn't want to meet the advisor. They were saving 6%. And as you could see, they keep saving 6%. What we got are people who wanted to meet with the advisor. They were saving typically 3%. He would tell them, you need to save a lot. Almost nobody can do it. And then he said, oh, we've got this other program, Save More to More. 80% of those who said we cannot save today volunteer to save more to more, 80%. And this is what their saving rates look like. They just kept going up and up and up by 3% every year. They quadrupled their saving rates. If you look at the chart, there's so many interesting questions, like those lazy academics, why did they stop in 2002? Right? I mean, can they just tell us where those people are today? Did it really help them retire with dignity? Lazy academics. Well, problem was the financial advisor passed away. He had cancer. So we couldn't continue monitoring the company. We didn't have access to the data. You might ask, this guy can't even do math. He told me they go up by 3% every year. Okay, 3.5, 6.5, 9.5, 11.5. Why not 12.5? Right? This is odd. So we found out that about a third of the people, after 2 increases, opted out. Not a single employee ever at this company reduced their saving rate to where they started. But we found out that a small portion over time said, this is enough for me. I don't want to go further up. I went up from 3 to 9, and I'll stick to 9. And to me, this is actually the best news. It's actually better than everyone keep going up. Because if people finally engage and personalize the solution to their situation, hallelujah, this is actually great. Okay, I think we could do a lot better given where we are now with data and technology. In the US, there's more consumer debt than defined contribution or DC savings. For every $1 in retirement savings, there are $2 of debt, but I am including mortgages. This is the world we live in. It's kind of the same in the UK. And it's very odd. Think about this as a bank who is looking at the assets and not at the liabilities. It's not going to go well, right? So it doesn't make sense that we're going to manage retirement assets without thinking about liabilities. So we started to think about how would we personalize the solution? And we kind of created the 2x2 metric that has incentives to save and incentives not to save, disincentives to save. If you think about it, if you have a match, if the company puts a lot of money when you put money, that actually is an incentive to save. On the other side, if you have a lot of expensive debt, then maybe you should deal with that before you start saving. If you're a single parent with 3 kids, 5 maxed out credit cards, maybe retirement saving is not today. And we started to create kind of all sorts of solutions, but the one I want to talk about, the one that I actually think is the most interesting, is the bottom left, which I will call save less today and even more tomorrow. If the employer doesn't provide the match and you have a lot of debt, maybe we need to start helping you deal with the debt and only then get to the savings, because it probably doesn't make sense that you're gonna default on your credit card. I'm gonna briefly talk about another experiment we ran. This is actually a very different setting. People are not saving for retirement. They might be saving to buy a new iPhone. They're, think about the people in this sample as Uber drivers. They don't even have a salary. They make their money in a way that is not really scheduled and predicted. It's raining today, I'm driving more, I'm making more money. It's not raining, people are walking, I make less money. That kind of an environment. And historically, we thought about savings as a monthly amount. And we worked with this company, Acorns, and since then the company grew, having millions of people saving, but we kind of said, what if we just think differently about savings? What if we're gonna call this $5 a day versus $150 a month? Now, some of you are kind of in the details, and you're gonna be like, it's gonna be expensive. How are you gonna move money every day? We didn't. We actually didn't matter what you chose. We moved the money on a weekly basis and we told people. So this is just how you think about it. Nothing changed in terms of the mechanics, which is beautiful because we didn't need engineering and all this stuff. This is what we found. 7% were willing to save a monthly amount, 11% a weekly amount, and 30% a daily amount. So think about it. We're now making it easier to think about savings. 4 times as many are saving. We changed a couple of words on a screen. We didn't even change more than 1 line of code. That's it. Okay? This does raise a big question that, I guess I don't have a good answer. Why the heck smart financial institutions don't put more money into mastering this kind of stuff? It's like, it's such a no-brainer, those little tweaks. We just got new fascinating result. This is even more fun, but I don't know if it applies, so I'll have to ask you. I guess, I know it doesn't apply because everything in Colombia is in thousands of local currency, but that was dumb of me. When I was in Israel, we had hyperinflation, so things were in the millions, actually. You actually had to be good at the zeros because you would buy things for $1 billion. But in the US, the amounts are much smaller. So we kind of have dollars, but we still have pennies, which is 1% of a dollar. And people still talk about dollars and they talk about cents or pennies. And what we've done, we went in a retirement plan, instead of telling people that they're gonna save 6% of their pay, we told them that they're gonna save 6 pennies for every dollar they make. It tends to make people save more, but what's really interesting it doesn't affect people like you. Higher income, people who are good with numbers, more educated, doesn't matter, they can do the math. They know that 6 pennies, 6% is the same. You're not gonna get Google employees or OpenAI engineers to change with them. But the janitors at the hospital who are not good with numbers and other populations who struggle with numbers, especially with percentages, they don't relate to it and they don't know what it means. So when you actually try to translate it, it makes it easier. And what we found is it completely closes gaps in savings behavior. When you actually frame it as pennies per dollar you make, you suddenly don't see any difference in the saving behavior of people with more or less income. So think how hard governments work, tax incentives, all sorts of stuff to close gaps in saving behaviors. And think about this intervention for a second. You just change percent to pennies per dollar earned, and you suddenly close the gap in saving behavior. Okay, this is kind of the same thing. We found the same things when we frame savings as a daily amount. Not only you reduce societal gaps in saving behavior, they disappear. They just disappear, which, I don't know, I got really excited about that. Maybe I'm a geek, but, you know, that got me really excited. Okay, so we talked about several ways to make things easy. Whether it's autopilots like Save More Tomorrow, whether it's framing things differently like a daily amount, like pennies. But this is the most exciting time since I started to play with behavioral economics 30-some years ago, because there's so much more opportunities to scale the insights. So I'm thinking now of a nudge machine. Taking an AI, you send AI to the Behavioral Economics University and you say, why don't you learn how to nudge people? Here, go to the university, kind of a thing, the equivalent of that for the machine. Now, here's where this gets actually crazy exciting. How many of you are involved in market research? You've been surveying some population of participants or clients, who've been looking at some reports at your organization about clients and things? Anyone? It takes time, it costs a lot of money. We could just generate the population. The machine can actually generate populations of CFOs who are going to decide about the pension, of members, plan participants who we're trying to convince to save. So imagine we're generating, synthetically, we're creating a virtual population of 1 million Colombians. And you tell me kind of the characteristic, okay? Think about it. We can now take the machine that learned how to nudge, deploy it on an artificial population to master nudging people to save. Nothing can backfire. These are not real people. These are not real financial decisions. So all of this, you can kind of master the safety of the system before you unleash it to real humans. We've done this with people in the US who have a lot of student debt, and we find that the machine learns incredibly fast on synthetic population. It learns how to talk to those humans, even though they're kind of virtual humans. Now, it's probably even more exciting where you take it to the field and you virtually tell the machine, we want people to save, we want people to do this, this, that. Here's the feedback. Go figure it out. So this is kind of the world we're living in. So, you know, I guess I'm not going to retire for a while because it's just too exciting. Let's talk about personalization. I think that's very important. People are very different. This is work I've done in the US with two large record keepers, retirement plan providers. And we virtually have software to help people create a retirement income plan to decumulate their assets. We were interested to find out how different are those people. Because when people are young in the US, think about UPS. How many of you get Amazon packages? Anyone? Last year I got more than 1,000 Amazon packages. This is kind of life in the US. Yeah, it's multiple times a day. You forget toothbrush and you could click and it shows up in 30 minutes. Like, I mean, it's crazy. But think about all those UPS drivers dropping packages. UPS hires tens of thousands of them a year. They're all young. They're all healthy. They're all making the same amount of money. They're kind of more lookalikes. Some of them might have a lot of debt. Some of them might be married. Some no. There's still differences. We don't want to ignore it. But if we say they all should save about X and this is a good way to start investing, it's not a bad way to start the retirement journey. Fast forward, David Nieto is a UPS driver in my neighborhood, been with UPS for 31 years, super healthy, happy, love his job, in his mid-60s. Not every UPS driver at that point is healthy. He's still married, got 3 kids, 5 grandkids. Some are divorced, some never had kids, and so on. So we accumulate assets, but we also accumulate differences as we get older. And we were wondering how different are people as they reach retirement. So we started with the populations of those 2 record keepers, but then we looked how many people are uncomfortable with the level of risk that is kind of the most common, with the typical one. And we found that some people, about a third, need something different. What about leaving money behind? Do you want to leave money? Some do, some don't. Do you want to spend the money earlier in retirement when you could still travel or not? Are you in good health or not? Do you want to claim your Social Security benefits right away? Or are you willing to wait and get a lot more? It's a really good deal in the US to wait. The bottom line is that nobody fits the typical plan. 95% need a personalized solution. So, you're probably wondering, how can it be that the most common choices are so uncommon? Right? I'm telling you, nobody fits the most common choices. Reason is, there are multiple dimensions to the problem. And that's why nobody fits the most common one. Let me give you an example, okay? How many of you have shoes? Yeah, I know it's a dumb question. Everyone got shoes, right? Great. How many of you have sneakers? Keep your hands up if you have sneakers, okay? Keep them up only if you have Nike sneakers. If it's not Nike, take down. Keep them up only if they're white. If they're not white, take them down. Keep them up only if it's size 43, otherwise take them down. Nobody is left. And probably a Nike size 43 in white color is probably the most common shoes out there, but it's just still a sleeve. So when we're talking about people saving for retirement, the most common preferences, how much to leave behind, how much risk to take, how fast to spend the money, am I in good health? Even though I'm taking the most common scenarios and preferences, they don't fit anyone. Very much like a Nike white sneaker size 43 might be the most common shoe, but it barely fits anyone. So we need to personalize. And I want to show you the crazy things we could do these days with just a bit of AI. So I'm going to ask my colleagues in the back to switch from the PowerPoint. Oh, perfect. Thank you. So this is a tool we've built where we virtually, let's see if I can, yeah, success. This is a tool we've built where we virtually have a machine chat with people about how to spend their money in retirement so that they fully enjoy it, but they don't run out of money too quickly. Because we always got that tension, right? Why did you save? To spend it in retirement. Well, go spend it. Oh, not too fast. You're going to run out of money. Now, ChatGPT has never been built to do math. Version 3.5 couldn't do 12 plus 23 plus 34. We could talk why I'm using that example, because it did know how to do 11 plus 11 plus 11. Because the way it learns, it looks online. So it probably saw someone talking about 11 plus 11 plus 11. But there were probably not many people who cared about 12 plus 23 plus 34. So when you asked it, it would get the wrong answer. When you tell it it got the wrong answer, it would say, I'm so sorry, let me redo it, and it gave you another wrong answer. Later on, how did they fix it? They virtually told GPT, look, if someone comes and asks a question about math, just go use this calculator and go back, give them the answer. So when you think about our chat, it's exactly the same thing. We've got a machine that really knows how to talk to people. It's not built to do financial engineering. So whenever there's a question about financial engineering, we've taught the machine, go back, take it actually from the financial algorithms, don't try to learn how to do it yourself. And then it's just about how good are your guardrails. So the machine can be very flexible and just chat, but very strict and not try to invent its own financial solutions. So I'm going to plug here the UPS driver in my neighborhood. So I would say I was born in 1960, let's say. I make $80,000 a year. I saved about $420,000. I'm a male. Now, it's a machine, so I probably have some spelling errors because I can't see it here on the screen. The machine will figure it out. The machine can do it in Spanish. It's a machine. It doesn't really matter. It can do a lot of things. Then it's going to think, and it's going to create probably a list of questions. It's asking me what is my health, all sorts of questions. I can answer them quickly, and then it would just, figure out everything. So let's say I was born in January. And now it's asking all sorts of questions. What's your health? This one question predicts 8 years gap in longevity in retirement. One question, think how much information we could get. In the interest of time, I would just tell it that all the assumptions are good so that we don't have to waste too much time. I'm sure I'm adding a lot of typos, but this is great because it's gonna figure out all of the above. It's going to come up with a number. It's going to tell me when to claim Social Security. It's assuming some longevity calculations. It's very interesting. What do you think most people would say when they get this? Nice, not enough. I can now challenge the machine and say, what can I do to change it? And we can now start having a dialogue. Whether we envision a world in which the machine gets it to the finish line, or whether we envision a world in which the machine is just to engage and empower humans to coexist, a hybrid model of advisors and a machine. Doesn't matter how you think about it, it's going to be a win-win, because globally, we just don't have enough advisors. And advisors are not interested in all investors. They're interested in the wealthy ones. So we have to actually think about how to solve that. Gonna go back, please, to the PowerPoint so that we could stay on time and have my perfect. Thank you. Let's, okay. This is really a cute question. I'm gonna go through it quickly and wrap up. This was a fintech company we worked with, and they wanted people to move to the higher paid tier where they offer more different types of savings accounts, but they're also gonna make more money. And we looked at it, and they were calling it, you know, kind of basic, premium, premier, whatever. And we said, what can we play with? They said, not much, engineers are busy. I said, can we at least change a couple of words? They say, yes. So we label things, bronze, silver, and gold. And in the interest of time, I would tell you that the revenues went up by 17% because everyone wanted gold. Nobody cared about premium tier. Okay, let's wrap up. With the new technologies, we can and we have to find new ways to engage. Whether it's visual AI, whether it's something else, the competition for attention is really stiff. And we have to compete and we have to win if we want people to act. We then have to make things easy, but we have to start thinking how the machine can learn on its own to use the right words, the right frames, and make it easy for people to take action. And it's here and now. This is not fantasy land. We're already living in it. And of course, hyper-personalization is critical. Different countries are gonna deal with different sensitivities. I do think we're gonna have to create a regulatory framework that the industry can actually propose so that everyone would feel comfortable using those tools with end users and run with it much faster. And I would probably stop here in the interest of time. Thank you so much. And, you know, I hope you're energized as much as I am about the opportunities to get people to save more on their own, because the governments can't always do it for them. Thank you.